Hey guys, my name is Wren, and I'm bad at art. Today, we're doing some more watercolor stuff. I have a piece planned for hopefully sometime soon of a watercolor rendition of a tiefling, which is a race from Dungeons and Dragons. This character is inspired by, but not actually, a player in a Pathfinder campaign that I'm currently running. This is not even close to what this character actually looks like. I have drawn my player's character before, but this is just something that, since drawing his character, which is also a tiefling, I just couldn't get this idea out of my head. So I drew it, and then I drew it again, and then I drew it again, and then one more time, and then I traced it 2 times on this watercolor paper, and we are doing some color thumbnails, kind of, but not really. So what we're doing here is some more detailed color thumbnails than what I probably should have done. And I'm going to do a couple more really simple, like probably 1 inch by 1 inch big color thumbnails, just because even after doing these 2 here, I'm still not 100% sure what I want to do for the final piece. And honestly, if I can't make up my mind, I might just do several. I was really trying to experiment with colors that I don't normally use. As you can see here on the bottom right corner of the page, I have swatched out a couple of colors there. I am using the Brilliant Red, which is what I use every single time that I paint. I just love that vibrant, warm red. It is probably my favorite color to use ever. It's just so good. It adds so much life all the time. I really love it. And yeah, it's just it calls to me, guys. It calls to me. Other than that, I did swatch out a couple of different colors. I'm using ultramarine blue for these pieces instead of the phthalo blue, which is what I normally use. I also swatched out both my lemon yellow and my medium yellow again, just to see which I wanted to try to use for the top right version of this, as opposed to the bottom left version, which I use burnt sienna instead of a true yellow color, or yellow ochre, which is what I normally use. I really just wanted to kind of push myself out of my comfort zones, see what I don't want to say capable of, but capable of. See what would give me the mood that I wanted. And I mean, you'll see how that goes when we get there. I'm just starting out by laying in that Brilliant Red where I would normally put the red colors. Lips, ears, tip of the nose, fingertips, other blushy bits. I also have, just gonna address it real quick, a little elf dude up in the top left corner of the page. That was mostly there to make sure that my brush strokes stayed really loose. I would go and add a little bit more to that guy every time I realized that I was stiffening up. I was being a little bit too controlling with it. The caveat that I allowed myself was I was allowed to be a little bit more detail-oriented if I added too much water to the page. So I did notice there would be times where I added water to the page on purpose so I could try to get some details in there, and I should not have done that. But I did, so we're just going with it, because I can't change the past. So what I did here, after laying in all of these lovely reds, was I looked at the piece and I tried to figure out where the blue tones would go. And I decided to use blue both for shadow but also for depth. So I've got some of those blue tones in places where there are not actually any shadows. That does come back to bite me a little bit on that top right dude, because I added a little bit too much blue in places where there was not any shadow, and the shadow colors that I ended up using were very blue toned. So it distorted the face just a little bit with that shadow on the jawline, and I kind of wish I hadn't done that, but I didn't realize that it was a mistake until it was too late to fix it. So, you know, it is what it is. You live and you learn. What I really, really did like, though, was the blue right on the inner corner of the eye. I feel like that just added a lot of dimension, and it made it feel really moody, and that's what I was going for. I wanted something a little bit more toned down, a little bit moodier. I wanted it to have a lot of emotion, and I think I did okay with figuring out how to do that. I definitely made some progress. I found my biggest challenge was getting some really nice dark colors. A big portion of that comes from, first of all, my aversion to using black. I think that comes from how much time I've spent doing digital paintings. You really avoid that harsh, unnatural black when you do digital art. I know some people don't, but it is best course of action to leave the blacks alone, because they just add so much edge, and it's so hard to work with and work around once you add in those electronic looking manufactured blacks. But I do think that another portion of why I was having a difficult time getting some really, really dark colors is that my paints are student grade. They are not professional grade paints. They are not really nice paints by any use of the word. And so I think perhaps I was having a little bit of limitations from my supplies with that. But I'm going to make do, because this is what I got, and I'm going to work with what I got. In this lower piece here, I made sure not to add any blue to the jawline, because it was shortly after I finished all of the top values that I realized that that was really throwing off the dimensions of the face. For me, at least. Like, it was really, really bugging me. So I made sure to not touch that area with the blue. It did end up with me being much more reserved with my application of the blues as well. And I do rectify that later, so that's okay. I did choose to use my medium yellow for the top right dude. And I was kind of liking the effect it was giving, but it was also just really bright. It's really, really bright. I'm so used to my nice, soft, muted, yellow, ochre color that I pulled up a ton of that. Just so much. I just lifted almost all of the yellow off of that top piece, and I think that's something that shows in the final piece and how it ended up looking. I also lost a little bit of footage in there, so you don't see, but I do go in with the burnt sienna on the bottom left version. That ends up giving the skin tone a much warmer look overall, which I think is a really good contrast to the background. I did pick up my phthalo blue for the background of this one. I guess I couldn't stand not using it, so that's what's there. For the top right guy, I used some ultramarine blue and some burnt sienna, and I mixed it together to get that interesting shifting neutral color. There are places where it's definitely more sienna than ultramarine, and there are other places where it's definitely more ultramarine than it is sienna. And I really, really loved how that worked out. And as I was doing this, I realized that that neutral color would be really, really good for what I wanted the hair on that bottom left piece to look like. So I decided to use it. And I went right in there and started laying in that lovely, lovely neutral color with the shifting hues, and I really love how this turned out. And then I lost some more footage again, so you don't get to see me fill in all of that. I also use some Payne's Gray for the horns in a gradient. I don't intentionally put the gradient there, it just ends up that way, and I really, really like how it looks. Of a lighter color on the outside of that horn to a darker color on the inside, and then obviously the back horn is darker. That one was on purpose. I did that so that you could see a little bit more depth. And then I mixed some of my Brilliant Red and my Phthalo Blue and ended up with a very maroony color that I started laying in for the hair on the top right version of the tiefling. And I realized that since I used the background of the top one for the hair on the lower one, I should probably use the background on the lower one for the hair on the top one. And that dark maroon color, I realized, was exactly the amount of desaturation that I needed in the background on the lower left version. So I slapped a ton more of that on the background. It ended up much more blue than the hair on the top ended up being. But altogether, I think it looks a lot more comprehensive that way. Anyways, it was at about this point where I realized that I was liking one of these pieces way more than I was liking the other. And the only thing I could put my finger on for it was that top piece captured so much more of the moodiness than the bottom piece did. And a good portion of that reason I can only think to attribute to the amount of shading that I was able to put in at the very beginning with the blues that I laid in on the top that I did not lay in on the bottom. So I went in with ultramarine blue and a little bit of burnt sienna and a little bit of Payne's Gray in some places and not so much in others. So the shadows in that lower piece do have a very shifty tone. I do not like that very much. So if I were to go with this color combination in the final piece, that is something I would probably tweak and change just a little bit. I don't hate it. I just don't think that it looks as good as it could if it wasn't such a shifting color. But while laying in these colors, I did realize that a lot of the mood and the tone that I wanted that I wasn't getting from that lower piece was attributed to the fact that there was not the shadow on it that there was on the top piece. I do want to talk just a little bit right now about what draws me to that top version so much. Part of it is that granulating blue. That ultramarine granulated so much in the top piece, and it's just so, so pretty. I love the texture that it gives it. It feels gritty, it feels real, and it definitely feels moody. The other thing is how much Payne's Gray I allowed myself to use in that top piece too. That Payne's Gray also granulated a lot, and I absolutely love it. I'm actually kind of upset that I hadn't allowed myself to play with those two colors specifically before, but I'm really glad that I went out of my comfort zone on these pieces, even though I didn't stick to a strict 3-color palette for the both of them. And I'm honestly really, really glad that I didn't. If I hadn't stretched out of my 3-color palette comfort zone, I wouldn't have added in that phthalo blue and gotten those really, really nice desaturated reds and purples. And I wouldn't have added in that Payne's Gray and gotten those really, really beautiful granulating shadows. The thing that I'm the most disappointed with on that top composition is the background does not fade as dark on it towards the left, it's almost too dark on the right side, which makes all of the lighting feel really weird. Whereas on the bottom one, it feels way more comprehensive. It feels way more cohesive and like it makes sense with the background being darker on the left side. But that one's an easy fix. The other thing that I wasn't particularly thrilled with was I lifted all of the yellow. I think I really lifted all of it. I thought I had left more in there than I did. But the yellow that I did leave in there almost gives it like a dead sort of feeling. And I don't think it's effective. I don't think it's doing what I wanted it to be doing. The other thing is there is a slight difference between these two pieces here. The hair is a little bit different, and I just absolutely love the hair on the bottom way more. So no matter what I end up doing, the hair is going to look like the bottom left version and not the top right version. The things on the bottom left version that I'm not as content with as I could have been were my general inabilities to use colors that were different from what I'm used to using. That was a big portion of it. I think that's the biggest portion of it, actually, is that I really love how it turned out, but I'm a little disappointed with the amount of variation from what I could have done with what I normally use. Another big thing was that I just didn't use the Payne's Gray as much as I did in the piece that is on the top right. And honestly, I think that the Payne's Gray was a really big portion of capturing the feeling that I wanted this piece to have. So if I were to use the bottom left color palette for the final piece, I would definitely try to incorporate more of that Payne's Gray. I absolutely love, 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 love the granulation that happens when I use this Payne's Gray. But what about y'all? What do you guys think of these two color comps that I did here? Let me know which one that you might like to see me use more for the final piece. Thank you so much for coming and hanging out with me. I had a really great time as always, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!